Welcome everyone to this public lecture organised by the Griffith Asia Institute, Pacific Hub and by the Griffith Centre for Social Cultural Research, which has a long acronym, GCSCR. My name is Sue Travascus and I'm the Deputy Director of that centre, GCSCR, and our centre is very much dedicated to understanding current challenges facing the world today. And we've got academics from a broad range of disciplines. And our research focuses on history, media, human geography, mobilities, communities, securities, insecurity, wellbeing, language and culture. So I think we're very much in for a great treat tonight. And I'd love to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're meeting, and that's the Yakaba and Turrbal lands, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to hand over the floor to Takia to give us the opening prayer. And I'll come back and say a few more words after that. Here's the mic, the pretend mic.
Let's start with a word of prayer. That's our today's session. Pastai dia tua, pastai singa tu, pastai dia manual. Five model trade cultivators. We thank you, Lord, that you have brought us together today to discuss, to deliberate, and also to think about our futures moving forward. We also like to thank you in bringing all to this space so that he can share, can also teach us things that we have already got, our culture, our values. Thank you, Lord, for the knowledge and the wisdom. Thank you, Lord, for everything that has brought us all together to this space. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks so much. That's lovely. We're here tonight to hear from Reverend Professor Upolu Lumā Vaai, Principal and Professor of Theology and Ethics at the Pacific Theological College in Fiji. The Reverend Professor is a practiced Indigenous philosopher and decolonial theologian whose doctorate in philosophy was taken at Griffith University. So we're welcoming back a local. Professor Vaai is currently guiding the transition of the Pacific Theological College to become a university, Pacifica Communities University. And the church is premised on an idea of whole of life philosophies. The Reverend Professor has contributed to Indigenous debates as a leading academic on Indigenous relational philosophy, not just in the Pacific, but globally. He has edited several books on decolonising the Pacific, including books over here in display, Relational Hermeneutics, The Relational Self, and Restoring the Pacifica Household. Professor Vaai engages with Pacific regional organisations such as Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, and he applies his philosophical research in practical areas like training in order to advance the decolonial thinking and practice in policy and in projects. And I'd like to hand over now to Tess Newton from the GAI Pacific Hub to say a few more words. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's fabulous to be able to collaborate with our colleagues at the Centre, and thank you to Carol for inviting the Pacific Hub at Griffith Asia Institute to be part of the programme that we've had today. As Sue's already mentioned, we are welcoming back Professor Vaai, who is a Griffith alumnus, and we're very proud of him as one of our alumni. We're we're very conscious of the enormous contribution he has made and is continuing to make across the Pacific and across the globe with his thinking. As some of you may know, the Pacific Hub is a relatively new addition to the Griffith portfolio, and one of the things that we're trying to do is create a connection point between our researchers, our students, the diaspora communities of Queensland, and our colleagues from the Pacific to come together to share knowledge, to learn from each other, and to think big thoughts and address big questions about what the future of the Pacific may be or will be, and where Australia can be a part of that. What does it really mean for Australia to be a Pacific country, to be part of a Pacific community? So at today's workshop, we've already heard some really important foundational wisdom statements from Professor Vaai. I'm sure we're going to hear more again this evening. We've had some really challenging and important conversations already. And certainly on behalf of the Pacific Hub and the Griffith Asia Institute, I'm very keen to see those conversations continue through all formats, virtual and in person. And certainly very much looking forward to hearing from you, Upolu. And now I'm happy to hand the floor to you.
Maude tuai ana le aso. Maude pa i o poto. O ono whaatulu I tangata whanua. Nā tō e umiana nei whanua. Australia. I acknowledge God, the Creator Spirit, shaping our being and life. I also acknowledge and respect, give my respect to traditional owners of this land, custodians of this land, and also the elders in the past, the present, and emerging as well. And of course, I like to acknowledge this space, of course, the Griffith Asia Institute, as well as the Pacific Hub, and the enormous task to, of course, have this conversation with you. I really appreciate that opening up the space. And it's really nice to be back to Griffith University, acknowledging the leaders of the Griffith Asia Institute and the Hub and all others. But also like to acknowledge my my mentors who are here. Professor Onrush, who was my supervisor when I did my PhD. Yeah, so he's here right now. So everything that I do, I of course dedicated to him. If anything wrong, we blame him. What is done, but of course I've learned a lot of, and of course my mother, Sister Moya, who is here, has always been a guiding light to me when I was doing my PhD here, and continue to be the guiding light for my work. She's very critical. When I take her in my work, she look at my work and say, this one needs to be closed, this one. She's very critical in reading and revising and, of course, reviewing my work. She's Sister Moya. But of course, I also want to acknowledge the representative students who are here, members of faculty, and everyone who are here to be part of this conversation. So I just want to perhaps just begin with this. And we all know that colonialism, according to one Jackson from Aotearoa, New Zealand, I quote, takes away people's faith in themselves faith in our right to once again govern ourselves, to determine our destinies, and to tell our own stories, end of quote. So today's challenge is that we cannot govern ourselves if we do not, if all we do and create are governed by a foreign philosophical system. Colonization has buried our living springs that made us drink from artificial springs of philosophies that compartmentalize and create linear binaries that sever and divide. I argue that these philosophies very much shape many of development policies today. But my lecture and my work, I hope that I move beyond a say of 5 to 6 decades of decolonization mindset since the 1960s. I've been working in that space since I completed my PhD, even before my PhD, of supporting the decolonization movement in the Pacific. But I feel that something is missing. That's where I try to fill the gap. And the gap is that most of our development policies, whether it's in Australia or in a region, are very much shaped by Western philosophies. And how do we bring in a kind of whole of life relational philosophies that can underpin and develop more holistic policies, whether it's climate change, whether it's economic, all of these are important. And I vouch to move beyond deconstructing colonialism into rebuilding. It's the only way to heal, not just to really deconstruct the notion of colonization, but most importantly, is to rebuild. This is not to say that we remove ourselves from the importance of understanding the violence of colonization in our cultures and even neo-colonialism and its history, but to really focus on what is next, what is part of our next journey of decolonization. That is part of healing our societies. That is part of holistic. And my mother here, Sister Moya, will always tell me, we need to move forward. We need to move from decolonization. And I think she inspired me to really have that conversation when she looked at my work. Let me start with 2 disclaimers. One is that my Talanoa tonight are views from my own Itulangi, from my side of the horizon or side of the heavens. My preference to use the word Itulangi rather than worldview is deliberate. I've always found the idea of worldview problematic. The popularity of worldview, which can be traced back to Immanuel Kant, came at a time when, according to Georgina Stewart of Aotearoa, she said, and I quote, that Western Academy had amassed a great deal of information about many different cultures, languages, and knowledge bases, and as a result, a so-called articulated worldview was mainly adopted as the West's way of viewing other cultures, end of quote. While most of our worldviews are individual perceptions of the world, they are also one's vague and imperfect view of reality, shaped by one's context and environment. When we fail to acknowledge the limitation of our worldview, we consciously or unconsciously elevate our personal worldviews as universal, which has been the case with colonization and still is with neo-colonization. So my usage of the word Itulangi from my own culture reinforces my contextual positioning. The term connotes humility, reassuring that every perspective must be declared limited. Itulangi never claims to be the whole. It also acknowledges the fact that one's liberative Itulangi could be someone else's oppressive story. And second is that my constant reference to philosophies of the Pacific communities means I am speaking with rather than for them. I think this is very important. Speaking with is humility. Speaking for can be arrogant. This means that I can only speak from the memory of being a Pacific Islander and not for it. My aim is to avoid the modernistic trend of people claiming to speak on behalf of other people or other communities without their consent. So, a one-ification way. Let me just tell a little bit of one-ification way. Most of the areas of our development narrative are underpinned by a particular philosophy, whether we realize it or not. The colonial narrative is successful because it is built on philosophical ideologies created for one context that led to the structural conversion and domination of another, especially the consciousness of another context. Take, for example, the ideology that there are underdeveloped and developed cultures. An ideology that was pushed after World War II, after Harry Truman's presidential acceptance speech in 1949, where he said, and I quote, "We must embark on a bold new program for making benefits our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. What we envisage is a program of development based on concepts of democratic fair dealing," end of quote. According to Gustavo Esteva, on that day, 2 billion people became underdeveloped. In a very real sense, from that time on, they ceased being what they were, end of quote. But the thinking derived from the idea that there was one central blueprint for all development. A theory that, of course, goes back to Plato, where he argues that there is a perfect idea, which he calls the ideal, and an imperfect idea, which he calls the phenomenon. This one perfect idea from Platonic philosophical camp has not only stayed with us, it has also become us. In particular, us in the Pacific. David Sasha is not far off when he said that Platonic philosophy has been metaphysical and theoretical underpinning of Western cultures for thousands of years and development theory since the creation of nation state, end of quote. Today, I'm more concerned, for me, my work, when I go speak around, not only in the region, but also around the world, my concern is more on colonialism in us, rather than colonialism out there. The us here means us Pacific people. This kind of colonialism is dangerous, as it thrives on the idea of imitation that is also central to the church. In Christianity, we imitate Christ, even if this Christ is sometimes also seen as a white Christ. In the Pacific, we imitate elders and leaders out of respect. However, this imitation business can be destructive once it enters the development discourse, especially when we think that there is a true, centralized, ideal blueprint of development that is a center somewhere. So Aisaki Casimira, a colleague of mine from Matuma, explains that, I quote, "The rapid expansion of neoliberal economics rests entirely on this simple, yet captivating and highly appealing Platonic principle, truth. Reality, which is the essence of things, is universal. What is true for one is therefore true for everyone at all times. And the more universal a culture is, the closer to truth it becomes. End of quote. An imitation has become a portal for the Oneification project to live and breathe in the lungs of Pacific development discourse. Oneification is an ultra-reductionist project that only works in severing links and elimination of the other. It believes that there is only one constituent source of goodness. That is, everything, no matter the diverse they are, must dissolve into one reality and truth. Others who are different and are not willing to dance to our music of civilization must be aggressively developed to be like us or go through the elimination process. Oneification predicts a system that is rich only if it's insulated and cut off from the rest of the world. That is why colonization makes more sense if it is perceived as a digestive system. Colonization, as I usually define in my work, comes from the root word colon, meaning to digest or to swallow. It is a system where one absolute ideology, one absolute culture, one absolute religion, and one absolute truth digests all others. This concept of absolute truth was and still is the hallmark of Western cultures that is invading all other development discourses. As a result, the values of communities who largely operate under philosophies that are multidimensional, that are cyclical and flexible, where the physical, the mental, and spiritual are seen as a unified whole, have been relegated to the culture of whisper. The Christian Church has also for many centuries promoted the oneification principle through its doctrine of monotheism, the idea of the one true God. Monotheism is a term that only came into existence in 1680 through the work of Henry Moore, a time at the height of European colonial exploration and expansion. Thus, the fusion of monotheism, Platonism, and Aristotelianism resulted in the church becoming a home for a singular one God that gave warrant to discovery projects and the seizing of indigenous lands by explorers in the name of God. Take, for example, the idea of the Imago Dei, or the human being as the image of God, based on Genesis 1:26. In the transition of Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries as modern nation states, this image, mainly the human image, was universalized, individualized, and politically centralized as a measure of universal truth. A deliberate move to support Europe's colonization expansion. But this idea of a universalized image, of course, goes back to Immanuel Kant, human exceptionalism, or the idea that the human being is exceptional among all creatures as it can think rationally and logically. We see this exceptionalism dilemma built into our human rights policies, where entitlement is normally elevated above responsibility and the ecological references that such responsibility entails. In the conclusion of this book titled What We Bury at Night, Julian Agwon from Guam mourns the consequences of colonialism in us and our pursuit of a development story that results in our burial of the very things that make us us. He writes, and I quote, "Like the women of Likiepo, Rongelep, who go out in the middle of the night to bury their grape and stillborn babies, we too are out at night with shovels, burying our most sacred texts, our indigeneity, faith and spirituality, our blues, our dreams, our tears, our terror. That terror that comes when we are quiet, when we realize that we just can't negotiate with death. End of quote. So what is a whole of life integrated philosophy? Completed the reflection on oneification way or the oneification approach. But what is a whole of life integrated philosophy? Whole of life is a cosmic-based philosophy of integration. It is an ancient new philosophy about the realization that everything mutually merges independently through their interdependence. Difference is key to the whole of life. And I shared this with the workshop today. And according to Maya, she says that we are the same differently. End of quote. She continues that, and I quote, difference is what we have in common. When you go deeper into difference, we find the depth of what it means to be together. And sometimes it's really struggle for us to deal with those paradoxes because we are so familiar with the linear side of linear approaches that we don't know how to work on these binaries. So the whole of life means that our meaning as distinct individuals is tied to the meaning of the larger story of the cosmos. Our story is never a singular story. It is a story within a story. In many Polynesian cultures, the words for one, such as tasi, tahi, kotahi, ekahi, are never about the singular one, but rather about the plural one. So when we talk about God, it is, for us, means a plural one God. It is always a relational God. There is a separation, but also a constant movement between each other. In other words, because life is always integrated, therefore we cannot view things in mere compartments and binaries. And this is, of course, the issue with all our policies. It compartmentalizes, it puts things in binaries simply based on philosophies that separate and settle. At the heart of the whole of life is the self through whanua, or the land. When we talk about the land, when we hear me say the word land, we mean land, ocean, sky, people. We never mean land as just a piece of land. It is a holistic way. That's why we normally use the word whanua or whenua or hanua, simply because we see that it is the self through whanua, self through the whole. We can never have a singular self. It is always a plural self that is realized in the whanua. It is a consciousness that includes every dimension of life. So if we start with the whanua, everything changes. Our minds change, our approaches change, to life change. Reclaiming the whole of life way is not about going back to live in a bygone past, as some may fear. This fear is driven by our linear concept of time, that the past is merely a realm of history. It is rather about reclaiming the self through whanua principle. In many parts of the Pacific, because the past and the future move towards the present is the realm of communion, where the whanua, or the land, is the meeting point between past ancestors, the present us, and the future communities. So if you live in the Pacific communities, in particular the village, you would immediately notice that they operate in a very different philosophical frequency. Because of the self through the whanua principle, communities tend to express this whole of life way by embracing what is called mutual contradictions, as opposed to competing contradictions. where boundaries between worlds such as material and spiritual, living and dying, constantly move and shift to inform one another. Or in the words of my mentor, Professor Om, it's really about the reception of these worlds moving towards the other. There is a reception of each other. So for many Pacifica communities, dealing with mutual contradictions needs to be learned through experience, not through classrooms. You really have to live it in order to feel it. So one of the best things about living in village communities is that you are trained to think in a both end, where thinking in order to live in conflicting moments. Life operates in dealing with these moments. And community psyches are trained in an interflow of these moments, such as calm and disaster, peace and conflict, life and death, connection and disconnection, autonomy and relations. Community value these contradictions in many areas of life, such as leadership, politics, education, and economics. The issue with us today is that we no longer know how to weave these conflicting moments or these contradictions. We always have an either-or outlook or thinking when it comes to policies development. So, for example, when I grew up both in the inland and also coastal villages in Samoa, we were taught proverbs such as meaning we sleep in fortune to be awakened by misfortune. There's a so of fan maninoa, meaning calmness is next to storms. Meaning do not be deceived by the stillness of the morning tide. Meaning in strong tides, raise the sinnet sail, and in the easterly winds, raise the mat sail. I didn't know at the time how important these proverbs are, but these proverbs really bring together a both and with thinking and approaching of life. It really addressed mutual contradictions as opposed to competing contradictions that we have when we write policies. In particular, when it also comes to the educational side of things. So, for example, policy making today is really shaped by these competing contradictions. A thinking that goes back to Aristotle. In either or thinking, constructs such as calm and disaster or peace and conflict are not meant to coexist, because they cannot be both true and real at the same time. So according to Aristotle, one has to be real and one has to be true by eliminating the other. Today we compartmentalize and pull apart issues that should be deeply intersect and relate. And then we focus all our resources and energy on one at the expense of others. Such as climate change, for example. I'm not sure who are the people here who focus on climate change. But the problem is that, climate change can be dissected, and then we focus on climate change at the expense of all other issues in the Pacific. So a lot of resources and money now are now focused on climate change in the Pacific at the expense of issues such as mining, at the expense of issues such as gender and all other issues that are in the Pacific, because we focus and compartmentalize these issues as if these issues are not intersecting, they're not relating to each other. And as we focus on climate change, we create a victim's narrative that strongly pushes for relocation of communities from their traditional habitats. This is often done at the expense of their identity and spiritual grounding. We want to solve climate change mainly through mainstream science and finance, and at the same time, we eliminate indigenous spirituality and faith from the climate picture. We urge responsible countries to finance loss and damage to the climate victims that will, at the end of the day, will still be controlled by hierarchical and linear bureaucratic systems of the corporations, that other communities will find difficult to access such funding, let alone understand, or will never get any cent out of these fundings. I want to share you a story. A story that in most of our policies, for example, climate change, we tend to focus on elimination. So we want to eliminate climate change. We want to eliminate war, we want to eliminate conflicts, everything. But for the Pacific people, they don't really focus on elimination. They rather focus on resilience. And all of their culture, because it's informed by their cultures, they are more focused on resilience, for example. So conflict, they know that life is never about the absence of conflict. Conflict is meant to be woven into the fabric of well-being and growth in the communities. It's always there. Conflict is a path of knowledge to life. So, when I went to Kiribati, for example, I was talking with all these Kiribati people about how the world is really worrying about and sinking because of deep sea mining. And then all these people in Kiribati, they said, I'm not sure why they are worried about us, but never worried about ourselves. I think, aren't you supposed to be worried about yourself because of deep sea mining? And then they said something about we build our system to deal with conflicts. We have our own knowledge system to deal with climate change and to deal with so that's why they would always do, when it comes to the notion of kin tides, rather than running away from the kin tides, the children run to the kin tides. They like playing with the kin tides. But I also found many throughout the Pacific also similar stories. So one of the story is a story from one of the villages here in Nalasai in Fiji. This story was told by one of our students who was from the Young Academics project that we have. So let me read the story. Flooding is a common challenge in my village. Flooding can happen if there's too much rain. But over the years, even high tides push water into the village grounds. Sometimes it is clear light today. Nalasai, which is the name of the village here, and neighboring Sinu is flooded. With frequent flooding comes soil erosion. For many years, we waited for a concrete seawall to arrive. The floodgates came first. But the floodgates have given up, broken down. They submit to the strength of the tide. But we understand that the government has many to assist. How can we be resilient in the face of floods? The impacts of floods and wet village grounds, including homes sinking into the mud, are common. Should we relocate, or can we be resilient? After all, it's part of my province psyche that the floods are not a bad thing. We are just having a path. If there ever was a statement of resilience for my people and my province, this was it. So I decided to work on a nana. But first, I had to understand it. I didn't even know where to start, so I went back to the elders to hand me the knowledge of the nana. This is from Stella Rasima, from the village of Nalasai in Fiji. And this is her story. And a nana is actually the work to, it's a combination of human tree, a particular tree, and also the mud grab in order to add the land, to create land for extension of land in that village. And also there's interesting, my conversation with this village, during the flood, they never relocate or shift to another place. They would rather stay. But sometimes in the flooding in their houses, they drag their feet in the houses so that no mud is left when the flood dies out. And then they said that the flood brings food to them. So rather than them going to food, the flood get food. The flood actually brings food to them. Also, the soil rejuvenation after the flood. There's a lot of soil rejuvenation then, which has really helped them with their agricultural activities. So there's quite a celebration post-flood. So that is one of the examples of how people treat these conflicting, probably we call it opposites, or moments or components as really mutual. They are not supposed to be separated. One informs the other, and one informs the resilience of the people. From a whole of life perspective, our shortfalls in many areas of development, in peace building policies, climate change responses, diplomacy, leadership, capacity building, or economic resilience, derive from our inability to master and mobilize the wisdom deriving from mutual contradictions. The purpose of mutual coexistence of moments such as peace and conflict is to ensure a deep sense of well-being, resilience, and competency. Well-being is about resilience and competency to master the whole of life. The idea that life is made up of integration of contradictions and complexities. Which is why removing spirituality from the development policies is not only removing the house of being of the people, it is disrespectful to Pacific cultures. Recently, the release of the Australian International Development Policy is critical to Australia achieving sustainable development goals, but also the concentration of resources for the stability of the Pacific region. The policy is encompassing, and I'm sure many of you have read the policy, very encompassing, focusing on Asia, particularly the Pacific, with climate change, gender equality, and disability equity touted as top priorities. Apart from mentioning the Indo-Pacific 36 times, which is a framing that is controversial to some Pacific countries, there is no mention, as far as I know, of spirituality, which is not a surprise to me. But this means that such a policy repeats the same mistake that polarizes and eliminates rather than integrating life. And in particular, if you work in the Pacific, spirituality is core. I believe that any development policy that does not work to integrate life is ill-equipped to provide long-term solutions to issues in the Pacific. In many Pacific communities, because we are land and the land is us, and that spirituality makes possible that bonding of the land and us, there is no security without spiritual security, and no development without spiritual development. This is because our spirituality roots us to the fundamental. And perhaps in sidelining this spirituality in the Pacific, in the Australian policy, it actually portrays how the colonial either-or mentality is so entrenched in development. It also portrays the absence of spirituality of love in regional relations to collectively address issues such as deep sea mining in the Pacific Ocean, the recent revival of the Australian mining in areas such as the island of Banaba in the Pacific, the recent dumping of the radioactive nuclear waste into the Pacific Ocean, not forgetting that China's own nuclear power plants also released water waste with higher levels of tritium than that found in Fukushima's discharge. The issue of investing in the Australian palm scheme rather than investing in national economies of those countries that are losing their skills labor force to Australia, or the violation of human rights in countries such as West Papua, to name a few. While Australia's development policy says that Australia is committed to listening to and being guided by the wisdom of the Pacific Voices, I am not sure how this listening to Pacific wisdom is manifested in speaking up and standing up for the sake of their brothers and sisters in the Pacific. I just want to share with you this slide because it's very important about the wisdom. And I'll take this slide from my culture. It's the wisdom of restraint, which speaks of the importance of restraint. So Tofai's wisdom and Taofiofi comes from the root word Taofi, meaning to stop, to restrain, to control, to contain, to limit, to wait. So according to Tuyatua, that one, the Tofā Taofiofi, or the wisdom of restraint, is one of those easy to talk about, but hard to do principles. But the values of restraint includes knowing what to speak, the importance of content, when to speak it, the importance of time, where to speak it, the importance of situating in place and space, and how to speak it, the importance of method and approach. It is important to note that many Indigenous communities, including those in Australia, have autonomy built into their life structure. And I think Morgan and Mary, of course, talk about that a lot in their recent public lecture. But Indigenous idea of autonomy is informed not so much by whether we have the right to speak or to do something, but whether we have the right content, time, place, and approach in order to allow space for maturity in speech, wisdom in doing, and prudent judgment in decision making. That is also part of, in Fiji, we just recently had the conference called Whakatampu. And Whakatampu is really about revisiting the idea of slowing down time, slowing down our activities, slowing down development for the sake of the land. And I think, I always like to use Pope Francis' idea of rapidification of life. Everything is about rushing, rapidifying of everything. And we need to go back to the slowness of time, which is very sabbatical in the biblical language. But many Indigenous communities have their own processes of slowing down of time. And refers to the process of coconut oil making, cleaning of wells, the caring process for expanded mothers, replenishing of marine life, and the rehabilitation of land. While these concepts give an air of inaction, there is an active natural process of renewal and transformation occurring. These are deliberate attempts to respecting non-human intervention into the process, thus allowing nature and humanity a liberating space to heal, renew, and to articulate and action new development pathways. It is a negotiated space between humans and the natural world. So that's Fiji, they call it Whakatampu, that's concept. But in many countries in the Pacific, this is how they call it, the last bullet point there. So most of the Indigenous communities in the Pacific have this sense of slowing down, have their own philosophy of time and slowing down for the sake of the land, because the self through whanua, and the whanua is also in the self. It is unfortunate that many of our development policies have missed this very important aspect of development, because all of our development is really about profit, really about growth, and growth in the sense that when we grow our economy, we grow our production, but at the expense and the cost of many things, including our own people, including our land, including many things, including spirituality as well, which is very unfortunate. So just to conclude my talk, I want to just to raise a story. This is a story of the Fusina. Fusina is one of those a very powerful antibiotic that is, bush everywhere in Samoa. That's hardly used by now many Samoans, but it's one that has been used by many, including myself. And I continue to use it when we have a cut, and then this works more than antibiotics that you get from hospital. But one of my cousins was, he had a scratch on his leg, and then that scratch led to a lot of issues, and then he couldn't walk because the wound got deeper and deeper, and then took him to the hospital many times. He was prescribed a lot of prescriptions and didn't work. Took him to traditional healers. They connected to the devil and the curse and all of that. Then one day in May he just gave up living. Just said that I've had enough. This is about more than almost a year struggling with this wound. Then just one day, this ordinary lady just walked up and said that, why don't you try our traditional medicine? And that's the traditional, it's called Wasaina. He tried it. Only less than a week, the whole thing was healed. It's less than a week. This is a very powerful antibiotic. So the story is not in a way promote that what is found in the islands is presumably better than what is borrowed from outside. I'm not saying that. Nor it suggests that island traditional medicines are more effective compared to scientifically proven medicines. I'm also not saying that. The point is that the total neglect, misunderstanding, or reappropriation of what is found in island communities, in particular the knowledge system and wisdom, is at the heart of many development issues in the Pacific region. So the Fuasaina metaphor, if I want to use it here, is a metaphor that speaks to the agency of the Pacific people. It moves beyond hybridizing two worlds, Western and Pacific, which is a current case, which normally the powerful and the one with resources win. I'm suggesting that while our development life is dictated by the economic values of the Western world, we must be courageous to engage with Pacific philosophies and value the help build and values to help build a solid foundation that will determine what goes in and what goes out of our development story. So I end with two suggestions. The role of faith communities is very important in the Pacific. We miss spirituality, we miss the faith communities or churches. We miss the idea of developing the Pacific. And this is often the mistake that is made by many development partners. But they will only come to use the church, for example, as an implementation phase of the policies. So they always ask to use their halls and their churches for consultations, but they are never part of the policy making and decision making. And this is the biggest mistake that many policymakers do. And in particular, with many who I've worked with in the past. And the second one is the role of education. Education is key to rebuilding. To realize this possibility requires creating a new strategy to codify and translate this whole of life thinking and wisdom to inform development policies. So since 2019, I was tasked by Pacific churches because PTC is owned by 20 churches that spread throughout 16 countries in a region. So my council, 20 of these churches, their leaders sit in my council. So I was tasked, 2019, to move the current Pacific Theological College that I lead into a Pacifica Communities University, mainly to emphasize and to create a platform to really push for this whole of life thinking. The Bible calls it fullness of life. We call it for whole of life because it brings together and a sort of conflicting moments, bring together what we call competing traditions, but make them neutral and relating to each other because they are so critical to our spirituality. And I'm currently working at the moment to build that. But this is also we are creating also this based on the Pacific Church's vision of the household of God. So just to tell you a little bit about the household of God. I think the churches are tired of this kind of region that is subdivided into 3 sub-regions, as if we are not connected to each other. We have Melanesia, we have Micronesia, and we have Polynesia. Sometimes the Polynesians are very dominant. Sometimes Micronesians are quiet sometimes. But these are issues because they are legacies of colonization. So the Pacific churches moved away from the vision of the unity in the body of Christ, which is, of course, important. But for the Pacific churches, not enough to factor in this holistic in terms of pushing for the idea of the distinctiveness, but also a whole of life kind of perspective. So Pacific churches agreed to have the Pacific Household of God as its vision. So the university is built on this vision of Pacific Household, which looks at the Pacific as a family, a household, with the land, ocean, everything as part of that household. And we are mutually connected despite different languages, different colors, different ethnicities, but we are all one family. And that is the whole of life philosophy that we are moving. So last, just share with you again one of my courses that I run. I think I shared with the people today in our workshop. But this is the recent course that I convened and hosted in Suva on philosophy, Pacific Whole of Life philosophies for a new development consciousness. So many of them are policymakers, university lecturers, PhDs, and master students who attended the course. So we collaborate with policymakers such as the BEEFs, as well as SPC as well, and others. They lived in communities, they went to the communities, learned from the elders. I believe that Carol and also and TK that share their experience, because both of them were part of the course as well. But this is the course that will be running every year. And the whole idea is to look at a new development story that is holistic, that includes everything, that includes the land, that is about spirituality, that is about the whole, that includes communities and village communities, rather than a development story and a narrative that is guided by Western philosophies that more into the idea of growth that is promoted by the neoliberal capitalist system. So I just conclude with a Fijian proverb. Yeah. If you want to be free, that's a Fijian proverb, let the small trees grow far from the shadows of big trees so they can have life. And this is their own resilience in decolonization way of growing away from the big trees, whether that big tree is a country or corporation or a system. We need to move away from the shadows of that big tree in order to grow. The last one is this. and it fell from a very wise man in Melanesia. And this is what he said. Now that we are finally connected with the world, we suddenly see ourselves through the world mirror. Will we see our own true size images, or will we see ourselves in images and shadows of others? Will we see ourselves in the long shadows of the dwindling light and advanced darkness of the evening dusk? Or will we see ourselves in the long and radiant rays of the rising sun? We can choose if we will. So thank you very much for listening. That's part of it. But hopefully you can have questions, and if you have a conversation, please do so. I'm happy to have a talanongan conversation with all of you. Thank you very much.
Very much. I'm going to stay up here for some questions.
Yep.
So, thank you once again to Upolu for he's already been in the workshop this afternoon with us, and now again sharing his knowledge. So I just want to say very, very thank you. But does anyone have any questions? We'll probably have about 3 or 4 questions formally, because there's food waiting, so we can also continue the conversation outside. Thanks. But does anyone have any questions?
Yes, my boss.
Thank you for the fact. Could you say, I was really taken by that quote you had there from the Hawaiian philosopher. I think
Money.
the difference is what we have in common. When you go deeper into difference, we find that the depth of what it means to be together. I mean, that is, then went on to talk about mutual contradictions, but there was kind of a wisdom there that really for our age and for our world. Could you say some more about that and your reflections on that?
Yeah.
Yes,
She was one of the mentors of our philosophy's course that we had in last July. And I love her work because she's a philosopher, she's a Vaai philosopher, Manulan Maya. And she's into this complementarity, if you want to say, or this mutual contradictions of things. So difference is not the opposite of togetherness. That's simply what she's saying. Distinctiveness is not the opposite of unity. It shouldn't be the opposite. Individuality is not the opposite of commonality. It shouldn't. They flow into each other. So one informs the other, and one can only exist because of relation to the other. And I think this idea resonates with me, with my own studies, because of the Trinitarian doctrine that I did it was a long time ago. But in that Trinitarian idea is that difference and or distinctiveness and unity, or difference and unity are woven together fluidly within the Trinity. So we cannot say we have one and then we have the many, or we have difference and then we have unity. You don't see that kind of distinctiveness in the Trinity. There is a weaving of both together. There's either you see it as a distinctive or either you see it as a unity, but there is a flow of that. So there is a distinctiveness, but there is also unity as well. I'm not saying I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but it's a whole idea of bringing together these contradictions that we normally sort of pull apart. But that's actually what she said. She's also responsible for saying that, the self through others. And so she likes saying that we always find ourselves through others. And others also find themselves through us, that flow from the self to the others and the others to the self, I think is a very important philosophical, if you want to put it that way, underpinning of kind of thinking that does not sever and divide, but really bring things together. Because in a world that we come from, but in particular the Indigenous world, it's very hard to work in a world and to be educated in a world that's severed, that's about competing contradictions. And then we go back to our communities, which are more mainly about mutual contradictions, that we don't see them as opposites or fighting each other. We normally see them as part of the other. Peace is part of conflict. Conflict is part of peace. The self is part of the whanua, and whanua is part of the self. It's always that continuity, if I would say.
Thank you.
Hope I'm making sense. Sorry, Morgan.
Thank you very much for the talk. These ideas, such as I resonate very much for me, or have come to resonate for me through my work with just political thought here in Australia, but also through accessing minor traditions within the Western canon. Thinking about a French political philosopher, John Bernard-Sie's, one of his books is called Being Singular Plural. One of the ways he explains this just in everyday terms is, what makes me French is the fact that I'm not the same Frenchman as the next one. So these ideas resonate for me, but I think they've come to resonate for me by seeking out and engaging with the material. One of the things I talk about with the key Aboriginal woman I do this work with, we were just talking about it today, is why, it's a question of why is it that mainstream knowledge, European-derived knowledge, is so seduced by the either-or thinking? Where does it gain its power and purchase over so much of our thought? I just was curious if you, as someone who is looking in from the outside and what we, European-derived thinkers do you have any thoughts about that? Why is the either-or thinking, why does it have such power and purchase over so much of our knowledge and our development?
It's a good question, because you go back and build the layers of the either-or thinking. When we think of objectivity and subjectivity, it exists there as well. When we think of church and state, it exists there as well. There's a lot of other contradictions, but most of our policies drive on it because it's a very popular philosophical notion. And it comes down to benefits. It comes down to benefits from it. It comes down to entitlements. It comes down to power. It comes down to ownership. Because the more you divide in either or, the more you power over, and the more you own, and the more you take another. Because that one is not part of the other. So we always think that because this land is not part of the people, we can take it and develop, because it's not part of the people. So that's why a lot of developers, they come to, open lands and empty lands. They say, oh, it's just an empty land. Let's take it, let's develop it. They don't know that land is full of stories, it's full of ancestors, full of life, although it's empty because of that connectedness. But they see things through so it comes back to benefit, ownership, taking, profit, power. That whole idea, yeah. Yes.
Just going back to the point, differences what we have in common when you go deeper and usually combine the depth of things together. I connect that very much with the theological idea of the Lumā day, the image of God, rather than the sense of exceptionalism. To me, that's the essence of what this Lumā day should be about. And paradoxically, rather than being an expression of exceptionalism, this image of God concept is what connects us, what should connect us to everything else. But it's being interpreted very differently. So I'm sure I'm not telling you anything, but just trying to, articulate a very different way of seeing what the Lumā Day, which fascinates me to hear about. What's it trying to express back there, especially not. And that for me is it's a lovely kind of way in.
Yeah, I think the Lumā Day is still a powerful doctrine for the church that can guide the church. But noting also that other communities see Lumā Day very differently because they see it very relationally and communally. So the image of God is not really the person. The image is the whole. It's a combination of the person, the land, ocean, everything that's there. That's a whole image. So the relationships. So the ecological aspect of the image has to be brought in, or else it's just a humanistic image that was promoted in the 18th century and still is the case with many. I think the whole idea is that how can we move away from a compartmentalized, very humanistic, anthropocentric, theological or philosophical in order to bring together a more holistic aspect where not just the person, but also the land, the ocean that are part of us, and therefore cannot be destroyed or extracted because they are part of us. And that's why I think I like reading Pope Francis' work, because it guides a lot of the thinking into the ecological, how to be good custodians of the earth. And that resonates a lot with a lot of indigenous peoples in his theology and also in his thinking as well. So the whole idea is that can we have a whole more holistic? I think I'm not saying that either or thinking doesn't have a place. Probably it has a space and a place, but somewhere else. It has its own context that can work in, but it doesn't work in all the contexts, and it doesn't work in all cultures. But that's a problem. We put a method and an approach as the method of colonization, then we apply it and impose it to all contexts, and this is a problem. Our education system is filled with either or structures and policies. And if we go deeper into these policies, can we really unpack and really reweave, if I use that terminology, in order to have a more holistic way of looking at our education system? That's exactly what we're trying to do in the Pacific, to remove us from really competing and also excluding, but a more inclusive story and a narrative needs to be created.
In the conversation, I tend to just wrap up a few words and.
Can I? I'll just a gift that I want to give to you. Sorry, but yeah. So last 2 years or last year, we've established our PTC Press, launched PTC Press. That was last year, and that PTC Press, I was fed up. Sorry to say this to all the scholars. I was fed up with the control of our knowledge and the control of costs by mainstream publishers. I published my books elsewhere, but then one of my experiences with one of the mainstream publisher really gave me the idea that now we have to have our own publisher. So I've established a BTC Press, but the BTC, and we've been publishing all these books, different. The whole idea is to publish also our, thesis, especially PhD theses that are newly coming out, really quality ones, and the research. And the whole idea is to help our communities in a very affordable price for our communities. So it's very affordable. We give them discounts as well for the Pacific, and we want to serve the Pacific in that way. So we want to donate these books to probably whoever library award.
Thank you so much.
Done.
This is fun. One of the many amazing things he does, which is establish a press, convert a college to a university, run multiple conferences, write many of the books. So we're so grateful that you've come and made time to spend time today. If you can't just hang up until 10 minutes.
They are going to be a very few words. I'd just like to say thank yous, first of all, to Carol and all of the people that have supported her at the centre in putting together this programme, both the workshop and tonight's lecture. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Griffith Theatre Institute that have helped with some of the logistics for that as well. Obviously, a great thank you to all of you for coming along this evening to be part of this event. I hope that you've heard things that have inspired you or challenged you or informed you as you go along in your lives and develop your own relational thinking and practice. Certainly over the course of this afternoon and this evening, I've had the privilege to hear from Upolu and heard some great words of wisdom, which doesn't come as a surprise, as you know, he is a purveyor of words of wisdom. And as Carol said, we are very grateful that he's spent some time here in Brisbane, and we would hope that this will be the first of many visits to Griffith and that we'll be seeing you again soon. On behalf of the Griffith Theatre Institute, I have a small gift to say thank you for spending some time with us.